Good morning if you are in Hollywood, California. Good afternoon if you are in Chicago, Illinois, where about 2 weeks ago, a pope, the first American pope, was named as new pope, Pope Leo the 14th. Good afternoon if you are in New York, as I am. Good evening if you might be in Chianti, in Italy, the place where everybody wants to go. Greetings to people all around the world. Welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know by now, classical music on Adagio is streamed in video and in audio as a platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making opera and classical music available to fans all around the world. Today is May 23rd of 2025. If you've been following this program for a while, you know that I had my 5th anniversary in April with Susan Graham, and I decided that May of 2025 would be a series called Fred's Favorites. It's my birthday. I'm allowed to do what I want. And so in May, I've been having people like Jamie Barton, Joyce DiDonato, Fella McDermott, and today's guest, who's really one of my very, very, very favorites, Emanuela Stucchi-Prinetti, who I have known, I figured it out, since 1984. So that was a good year, at least for us. Emanuela, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred. Thank you very, very much. What an introduction.
So do you happen to remember how and where we met? I certainly do.
You do.
Opera, it's called the Colpo di Fulmine. It's like I was struck by lightning when I met this magnificent woman. I loved her in about 2 minutes, and I still do. Do you remember where we met, or no, just another?
We have talked about that in the past, and I remember something about Bologna, where I was attending university.
No, we met at your house.
Oh.
In Tuscany.
Tuscany, Coltibuono.
We met at Badia Coltibuono, which is part of your family's possession, and as producers of wine and olive oil. And I was taken there by Carol Lolly, who was the editor of my first cookbook called The Authentic Pasta Book. And Carol was friends with your mother, Lorenza de' Medici. And we were brought there. You and Lorenza cooked lunch. You made a dessert called, if I remember, Moro in Camicia, which is hot chocolate pudding.
It was a favorite of my mom, yes.
And mine too, but that's the first time I had it. What is Moro in Camicia?
Moro in Camicia is like a sort of budino, chocolate. Moro means it's because it is black.
Right.
Good old way.
Like the opera Otello, Il Moro.
Yeah.
It was the same. Unfortunately, these words get racist connotations, but Moorish means also black or dark. Yeah. But Moro in Camicia means he's wearing a shirt.
Mm-hmm.
So why is the Moor wearing a shirt and eating chocolate pudding? I don't know.
In Camicia, well, maybe because of I'm really improvising, because this I was not ready to. We say uova in camicia is the way it's cooked that sort of it turns out. In camicia is a way of cooking. It's a way of like steaming.
Steaming or poaching, like a poached egg, is uova in camicia.
Why? Camicia, mystery. I need to go for a research and find.
But that's what we love, is when we research the histories of dishes and foods. They all have their fantastic and fascinating histories.
Fantastic, absolutely. Food can define so much of a person, of their life or what So it's very, very, very profound in a way to define. I mean, I'm reading a fascinating book on the food, the way Dante has used it, and now I should be better than this, and I should tell you the name of the author, who's Danielle, but I don't remember her full name, but I can send you the information if you want. Fantastic. She did a huge research, and just to say, Dante used it in poetry, and so he really knew what he was doing when he was mentioning one food, one recipe. It was linked to, of course, to gluttony. It was linked to.
Hmm.
Anyway, this is Dante, but just to say, there's so much to discover through food.
Now, I guess my favorite food reference from writers of that era was Boccaccio,
Yeah,
because Boccaccio in the Decameron wrote about sexual pleasure in food, and he
uh,
said that his idea of the most sexy thing one could do is to roll naked down a hill of grated Parmigiano Reggiano cheese. And I've tried it, but somehow it's not the sexiest thing I've ever encountered.
it's quite original because we've
It,
seen scenes with maybe rolling in chocolate,
chocolate, yes.
Roschi, I think.
Yep.
And we've seen, but
Whipped
Parmigiano
cream,
Parmigiano Reggiano is like the best cheese in the world.
I suppose, but it's not easy to get off your skin. But yes, let's leave it at that. Um, Now you grew up in a fascinating time and place where contemporaries, and I lived a lot of my youth in Italy. I didn't know you in my early youth. I met you, we met each other in our youth, but we grew up simultaneously, and I think that I know that you had interest in opera, in food culture, in the life and times of Italian people, especially young Italian people in the 1970s. I was a student in Bologna. Now, you said you were a student in Bologna.
I thought Bologna because, of course, in the 80s with my mother, I thought we maybe had, or maybe we talked about that once. Maybe we had a little
Mhm.
moment also in Bologna. Anyway, maybe,
When were you in Bologna?
yeah, we maybe
When were
had
you in Bologna?
Bologna 78 and 79.
Okay, I was there a little before you. I was there 75 through 77. I was in Milan in 78 and 79. I was working at La Scala, and I was in Pavia and Milan, but I was in Bologna a bit earlier. And Bologna, for me, and I want to hear what you thought, was paradise for students. I think the happiest year of my life was
Oh,
1975, 76,
yes,
because
yeah, sorry.
the food was wonderful. It was affordable.
Yes,
There was a bar, a trattoria, which I remember the name, um, off Via delle Moline, where for 500 lira, you could get primo, secondo, uh,
hysteria.
dolce, acqua, as you would always say, the waiter was Luigi, acqua, and acqua con gas, senza gas. And
Yeah,
every day we would have things like passatelli,
yeah,
gramigna, these beautiful pastas for a first course, and then roasted chicken or bollito, these traditions that, frankly, they continue today. But we were paying 500 lira. I know it's 50 years ago, but even then it was very cheap. And students could eat incredibly well. And it developed my taste buds that at the age of 20, 19, and 20, I was eating this really delicious food that was prepared with incredible care. And the freshness of the ingredients was such that it was like an advanced course in taste. And at the same time, I had a dear friend, Vittoria, and Vittoria was a year older than I was and taught me all kinds of things about quality of life. And we lived in a building nearby, and across the street was the Lattaia. This was the dairy. And in the morning, the Lattaia would have fresh milk and butter and yogurt. And I was usually the one I would go down and buy it from the Lattaia at 7 in the morning because the cows had been milked at 4. And this was Bologna, a city of 500,000 people. And to have this kind of quality available when you can still learn about such things, it changed my life. And I was studying at DOMS, which is their sort of arts conservatory, and working at the opera in Bologna, so that by day I had this incredible food education. I had an arts education. I learned the language. Bologna is a beautiful city. Um, at that time, buses were free. They were very
Hmm.
ahead of themselves, so that they decided that free transportation meant that there would be fewer cars in the city and the air would be cleaner. So
Yeah.
it was paradise for a student. What was your Bologna experience like?
Experience, well, for one thing, the food experience, what I really remember is unforgettable is the bomboloni at night, like at 4 a.m. They will start as students will be like spending,
These were like cream or jelly donuts.
yeah,
Yeah.
very soft and
Very airy, warm, with a little bit of sugar.
yeah,
Yeah.
squeezy,
Yeah.
after a night of all sort of things.
Yeah.
A great, huge street, beautiful. It was a place where people would meet. Also the taverne, as you said, but also the conviviality, the way people
Hmm.
gather, how they're nice, open, friendly, and then of course the student population was very. I mean, those years in Bologna, Dams, where I also was studying, was at the center of the world in a way for many reasons. Just newly opened, and I remember trying to go and attend some of the classes with Umberto Eco, who was
Hmm.
teaching there. It was almost impossible unless you were very motivated, and you'd go really long time before it would be impossible to get into that aula magna
Yeah.
and assist his classes. So it was really an intense moment. Also, a lot of protests, a lot of things
Yeah.
changed. So it was very stimulating.
I actually did study with Umberto Eco,
Oh, you did?
and
Oh,
he taught
so
semiotics, and he changed a lot. I think he probably even changed by the time you got him. But when I had him, he was a very formal professor,
oh,
and he was not the cultural figure that he became. And he did not like being questioned by students. He wanted
yeah,
to sort of
yeah,
pontificate and speak as if it were the gospel that he was saying. And he had a whole theory about how semiotics being the sound of the word communicated the ideas of the meaning of the word. And I, in Italian, see, you say prendere in giro. I was pulling his leg a bit because I would say, all right, so that means, and I meant this seriously, that an Italian's perception of the word of the world based on his or her relationship to the sound of the words is completely different from an English speaker. And that an English speaker in New York might have a different perception than one in Sydney, Australia, because it's a different world. And he said, forse, maybe. And I said, so for example, when you wash in the morning and you stand under water, what is that? He said, è la doccia. And I said, for me, it's a shower. And
yeah.
he said, well, that makes sense because the sound of the water coming out of the nozzle, and then it lands on you, it's too hot. Ow, ah. I said, so the origin of the word shower is ow, ah. He said, well, in English. And I said, what about dolce in Italian? He said, è più dolce, it's sweeter. He had an answer for everything, but it didn't make sense to me. So I said, all right, let's take an Italian chicken, a French chicken, a German chicken, and a British chicken. When she lays an egg, what sound does she make? And he said, all right. So I said, the English chicken says egg. The German chicken says I. The French chicken says oof. And the Italian chicken says uova. And he said, non mi piace. I don't like that. Because he felt I was teasing him. And a little bit I was. But it also really comes from the American tradition that you politely but firmly stand up, and if you don't agree, you ask and you challenge and you seek clarification. In Italian universities, sometimes the professor is more of a god and you just allow him or her to speak.
It's more one-way communication rather
Right.
than.
And he didn't like that. He understood where I came from because he was a sophisticated man. And he understood, I think, that I was not teasing him really, but that I just didn't feel that his theory of semiotics was valid
Mm.
across a broad spectrum. Maybe in smaller ways, absolutely. And he went on to write great books, of course. And recently, La Scala did an opera version, I didn't see it, of In the Name of the Rose. Did you
Yes,
happen to see it?
I really wanted to go, and I could have I could have had a ticket for the general rehearsal, but unfortunately that day, sort of, when the sky drops on your head and you just can't do it, so I missed it. But I know it's a big success.
Yeah,
I
I
know
gather.
it's been. I mean, I haven't even listened. You can listen to it on our radio on Rai as a
Hmm.
podcast, and I haven't had time. Interested,
Hmm.
and I'm sure it's a very good piece. Yeah,
Well, let's talk about Emanuela Stucchi-Prinetti and opera. You and I have gone to opera together. It's been my profession for a long
yeah,
time. I know you love opera. I know you have been involved in opera, but we've never really had this conversation. Talk to me
truly.
about you in opera.
It happened because of Bologna. It happened because of Bologna for me. I mean, I had a passion, but it was not really. I mean, I liked opera. Being a Milanese, I would go at La Scala with my family at times. I liked it. I liked it very much, theater, and I kind of had a passion for regista, director, theater director called Luca Ronconi. I was absolutely fascinated. He had done this amazing Orlando Furioso that was performed in Milano, in Piazza del Duomo, and I was 13 when I saw it. By chance, I had my little mobilette, my little scooter that had been given to me because I had finished my school well. And I started going around with my ciao, which was like a sort of like a ape, or one of those, and arrive by accident. I fall into this incredible show because Ronconi had taken the whole Orlando Furioso and put it on stage. He had prepared 6 huge stages around the Piazza del Duomo, so open air. He had asked to a sculptor called Ceroli to prepare all the mise en scène and all the machinery that he would use. And so I just it's one of the most powerful images of my life. It was seeing Angelica flying on a horse, on a hippogriffo, on the wings, made by Ceroli on top of Piazza della Scala. And I was so taken by this show that with a friend of mine, and a few years after, we went and knocked at the door. Ronconi was then working in Prato. He was preparing this Utopia, that was another amazing show that was held in this huge place with people coming, keep on moving in front, as if it was a big road and everything was. So I just knocked at the door and asked if I could somehow join the company work, and they said, "Oh, yeah, well, give us your references and what do you know? What can you do?" And I really didn't know much. I was
Hmm.
very hadn't prepared. But I said, I'll prepare myself. So then I am in Bologna, I'm studying, and I was studying theater at the history and all that. And suddenly, because there was a very intense exchange between Bologna and Paris, so this teacher comes from an acting school in Paris, from Monsieur Jacques Lecoq, and we meet. I was doing little theater things with little local groups, and I felt like very interested, and so I decided to apply. Went to the school in Paris, attended there, and when I finished after my first year, I'm coming back and I had an amazing phone call saying is an assistant of Ronconi, and he says, "Well, do you know music?" I said, "Yes," which was a big lie. I had no idea. I didn't even know what, was it central do for the piano. But I said, "Yes, yes, of course." Yeah, because, we need an actress that can sing a bit, and it's an opera by Luciano Berio. And
Wow.
that was my, because, if they said Traviata, everybody knows. I mean, if you're a musician, it would have been like immediate. Instead, I got real time to get ready because we were rehearsing in Rome for a very long time. So meanwhile, I was studying, and I managed to participate, and that sort of left a big impression and a big transformation of my life
Yeah.
and music.
Um, so you and I have never discussed this, but I too was in the circle of Luca Ronconi the year
Mm,
I met you, 1984, because I was already working at the Metropolitan Opera, but I was
mm.
spending a long summer in Italy because I loved it and missed it. And so I suppose I met you in June or July of that year because they were beginning a new festival in late July, early August called the Rossini Opera Festival in Pesaro. This
I
was the
know.
first year of it. And Ronconi was directing a production of Rossini's Il Viaggio a Reims with an all-star international cast. Um, I'm going to protect the innocent. There was a woman, a person singing in that cast who was having a relationship with a friend of mine.
Mm,
But the friend and this woman had other relationships. So I was sort of protecting their privacy and still am protecting their privacy, um, but was around the production as an assistant. The reason
mhm.
was by then I worked at the Met. I had worked for Giorgio Strehler, and Strehler and Ronconi admired each other, but there was a bit of
Very
friction. Yeah, they were different people. And I love both of them, but Strehler was the person I was in philo Strehler, let's call it. And but I was brought there by Claudio Abbado because I worked for Abbado when I was at La Scala, and Abbado conducted. And to me, I love many conductors. He's the greatest conductor I've ever had contact with. And any place he would say to me, "Come or go," I would do, as everyone did. And so Abbado conducted. There was this wonderful cast, and Luca Ronconi was the director, the producer, who created this production, which was magnificent. You saw it? Yeah,
I saw I saw it not in Pesaro, I saw it at La Scala in Milano,
that's
with
right. Yeah.
all ending crowd that comes in from Piazza della Scala running into the theater.
Right.
The
So
ending.
I'm guessing that in the lead, we had Katia Ricciarelli and you had Montserrat Caballé,
Yeah.
I think. In
Yeah.
the lead. Yeah, both were great. They were very different interpretations, but they're both great. Um, and it's an historic landmark in the history of opera, that production, because it was the first time since 1826, excuse me, asthma season in New York, that that they'd seen this opera. It was completely reconstructed, and it was kind of like the European Union because the story is they're going to a coronation in Reims, and they all wind up in a health spa in Switzerland or France, I think Switzerland. And the woman who runs the spa, which was the Katja Ricciarelli or Montserrat Caballé character, has to take in a Russian count, a British colonel, a Polish countess, all of these different characters, each with their own national characteristics. And Rossini wrote music in the Polish style, the British style, the Russian style, and German and Italian. And it's just an outstanding masterpiece that now is pretty much part of the standard repertory, but at that time was completely unknown.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a very favorable occasion for Ronconi. I mean, for him to be able to stage something that nobody had seen,
Yep.
because you do something, of course, in an opera, you have all the reference of the past, but
Yep.
the that he could start from scratch. That was such a greedy occasion for him. He
Hmm.
jumped on it and he just came out with a super, super marvelous, beautiful. show, Magnifico.
Now, as a girl in Milan and living also in Tuscany and traveling to Verona and traveling to other places, you and I'm not a girl because we were contemporaries, and I was in Italy, even though I didn't know you yet. I realized that you and I saw productions by Giorgio Strehler, Luca Ronconi, Franco Zeffirelli. Did you ever meet or work with Franco at all?
Oh yes, I
Okay,
had a long.
I'm sure we have plenty to talk about there too. Um, Pierluigi Pizzi, who's magnificent. He's a real artist. I'm leaving people out. I don't want to, if you think of others, mention them. But there were these great directors then. Um,
I'm thinking, got so lucky that I could see the Manon Lescaut by Visconti.
yeah, I was about to say Luchino Visconti was alive, but not as active as he was 15 years before. So I saw his productions, but I never got to know him.
Mm.
Did you?
No, not personally.
Okay. Um, so let's talk about Zeffirelli then, because I have 40 years of experience with Franco Zeffirelli, and he was a complicated, impossible, wonderful man. And I didn't hate him, but I loved him a lot. But there were times when I just I couldn't handle him. But he was a genius in his way. Talk about Zeffirelli.
Well, the story with Zeffirelli happened because I was still a student. I think Traviata was filmed in 81, 82, 81,
With
82.
Teresa Stratas and Placido Domingo?
That
Yes.
one. And it was filmed in Cinecittà. Uh,
Hmm.
and so my teacher, with whom I was studying, voice, and I kept on trying to go on with my learning of music and singing. She said, you should go because they're looking for Traviata, for Zeffirelli's Traviata. They're looking young ladies that can sing, and you should be. They probably will like you. So I went and I auditioned, and I remember meeting with Piero Tosi, that he kind of
Hmm.
my face like very ancient, and he said, "Ah, face I wanted." So old. And that was a very nice experience. And of course, then also I met their father of my children, so who
Yeah.
was assistant director for Franco, and so then I ended up being in the area. I mean, I didn't work for Zeffirelli anymore personally, but my ex Lucchino, he did for long
Hmm.
years, for a lot of films. So we'd go and at his house in Positano, or at his house in Rome, and meet all the celebrities.
I mean, to think that you and I were in all of these same places, but somehow our paths did not cross until I met you at your own home with your mother through my book editor. But talk about the place in Positano. It Frank. I mean, I went to Franco's place in Positano, but frankly, the day that I went there, and he invited people who worked on his films or productions. There were no women that day at all. Not even serving the food. There were no women. It was like a big, giant, gay party. Not everybody was there was gay, but it was only men.
Yeah, it is
And
true. Quite true, except for, if there were, I don't, Madonna, she went there. I mean, people, actors and actresses, or le gemelle Kessler, who
yes, these big German women.
and then television.
Yeah.
And
Um, but the thing was with him that everything he choreographed and arranged and designed everything.
yeah,
And no matter who worked for him, you could learn a lot from him. But he was in charge, and that's okay. I have no problem with that. But he had a vision for everything. And these great directors, Streller, Ronconi, others, Pizzi in his very unique way, very beautiful way, um, have these visions, and you sort of work with them in their vision, and they don't particularly, in my experience, adapt to others. British directors, American directors, maybe a little bit more. They're flexible and collaborative, but these great Italians had their vision and they saw it through. Do you agree
Yeah,
with me? Yeah.
yeah. For what was my experience, yes. I mean, I have less experience on, foreign, out of Italy, but I can confirm it was like that. They were very, very, very strong and very intense in their vision. And I don't know if this is still the case today. I can think of someone like Emma Dante. I guess she
Mhm.
would be someone that big vision. I just saw a
Yeah.
wonderful Jeanne d'Arc in Parma. I just been there, Giovanna d'Arco. That
So
was
Verdi's Giovanna d'Arco.
Verdi's Giovanna d'Arco, yes,
Yeah.
and she
Okay.
fantastic, fantastic way.
Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So she could be someone that has a big vision and a very strong personality. But yeah,
Um, when I was in Bologna and we were doing productions and student productions, they asked me what opera by Giuseppe Verdi do you think is ignored and no one ever does it? And I said Giovanna d'Arco, Joan of Arc. Now, there's a backstory to this that my favorite actress for a long time was Ingrid Bergman, who played Joan of Arc. She loved Italy. There were all these things. And so I always thought it would be an interesting production to do with Joan of Arc, even though Verdi's Joan of Arc is not much like the real story that we know of the Maid of Orleans. Um, and my teacher, I wonder if you ever met her, was this wonderful, my Italian teacher, wonderful soprano named Giuliola Frazioni.
yeah.
Now, that's Bolognese Frazioni. Um, and she was from Bologna. She was sort of after there were Callas and Tibaldi, Antonetto Stella, and a couple of sopranos just at that level. And then Giuliola Frazioni. And Giuliola Frazioni um, was a very kind, lovely woman, but she was afraid of flying. So she actually had a good career at La Scala. Her most famous performance was La Fanciulla del West in 1956 with Franco Corelli at La Scala. And she sang a fair amount in Italy, in Switzerland, in Austria, Germany, southern France. But though she was invited to America, she was afraid to fly. So she never went to England. And she could have had a bigger career if she was not afraid of
Yeah.
flying or ships or anything. So, but Giuliana Giuliola had a wonderful sense of humor. And she said in Italian, but I'll say it in English. She said, okay, Federico, um, how are you going to do the story? Are you going to do it the way Verdi wrote it or the story that you know of Joan of Arc? And that's the right question. And I said, I believe I'm supposed to do it the way Verdi wrote it. And she said, so you you won't have a fire, il rogo, that surrounds Joan of Arc. And I said, but listen to the music. Doesn't it sound like there's fire in the music? And she said, absolutely. But he was not asking for a fire. And I said, how do we know? And she said, well, because it's not written about. That doesn't mean that he wasn't asking for it. And because it's an opera that's never done, it's not like La Traviata where we have a history of productions. So what I did was in my production in school was I had Joan of Arc tied to the stake with her hands behind her, and the music came up, and the fire around her. We didn't have fire in the school, and but there was a period in the music where there's just music, and she's not singing yet as she burns up in flames, which is a great opera thing. And Giuliola said to me, "Okay, Federico, so what do you do with your singer now?" And I said, well, she's hot, she's suffering. And I said, but she wants to get out of there. She does not want to burn up yet. And Giuliana said, so what does she do? I said, Deve soffiare. She has to blow. So my soprano with her arms behind her was
She
try to
was
put out the flames. And Juliola said, why? And I said, it's a mad scene. She's tied up. And Juliola said, okay, but Ben, it's a good idea. But what I'm talking about in this process was that in every moment of an opera production, if you're trying to be faithful to the music and the words and the ideas, or even not, you have to imagine what the character is experiencing. And we get this from the music, first, in my view. We get it from the words, but we also get it from history and from ideas. And Juliola thought that I was kidding about blow out the flames. But I decided that Joan of Arc of myth would just stand there and burn and be a martyr. But I also felt in the short moment, she would try to survive.
yeah,
So
of course.
so what we had, people didn't know whether to laugh or not, but they were very intrigued by the fact that my Joan of Arc was blowing on the flames, but she was blowing on the flames the way the music was written, so the flames got higher. Just in music, we didn't have fire. Just in music. And what Juliola said after was how interesting it was how the breath, the solfege, came with the music. And she said, you're paying attention. And this is how we make opera productions. They're not all successful, but it requires a huge amount of paying attention, I think, because otherwise
Yeah,
you're just imposing a concept. And that was one of my great lessons, not only from Giulio Frazioni, who was primarily a singer, but Zeffirelli, who was very decorative. Streller was to me the most incisive dramatically of all. He went right to the drama of the moment and never mind what it looked like. Zeffirelli, Pizzi in a very beautiful way, Zeffirelli in a very opulent way. When I say beautiful with Pizzi, what I mean is that there was an elegance about his work that was
or
just on a whole other level. It was not just elegant for the sake of being bella figura, being elegant.
was also aiming at the point. He was conveying the point.
Yes, yeah.
That incredible beauty.
And
That was
he's still alive. But I think that when people talk about the great directors of that time, they leave him out. They don't remember him. And I remember Pierluigi Pizzi as being every bit as good as Franco Zeffirelli and more dramatically incisive than Zeffirelli and more decorative and more elegant than Giorgio Strehler. So, and Luca Ronconi was his own separate thing. But there were these giants of stage direction in Italy. So when people talk about that era and they say, oh, we had Pavarotti, Domingo, Carreras, Bergonzi, Freni, Scotto, Shirley Verrett, all these people, Rita Kabiavanska, Eleanor Bratsova, all these great singers. Yes, we did. But we also had these great conductors. We still had Gian Andrea Gavazzini in the 70s still conducting. It was remarkable to think about the people that you and I got to hear as young people
yeah,
that are legends now.
yeah, absolutely. And then I have a little story which is about, because you said Federico. So then I was in Rome, and and it ended up being a story connected to music because he was filming E la nave va, which is
Federico Fellini.
sorry, yes, I didn't mention
And the
Federico
ship sails on. Yeah.
sails on, which is the story of this diva that takes a ship to go to America, to the States. So that was again the theme. And I had a friend who's a writer, Andrea De Carlo, that was his assistant. So I started begging Andrea. I said, listen, please, I want to meet Fellini. Do something about it. Just give me a little time. So he said, oh, you should come because we have to pick up a few people to make some pictures that will be on in the set. It's not going to be anything more than that. But I said, yeah, absolutely. So there I go. At the time I had my black hair, long black hair. I meet Federico Fellini, and I'm in the theater. He looks at me and he says, okay, yes, you're going to be Valkyria. So he put me long, long to It was so funny. It was so sweet. It was
So you were in La Naveva
so to say, don't really see me because
as a
it's
comparsa, as an extra.
an extra on a picture behind in the cabin of the diva.
So
No,
this is something else you and I have in common. I was not in La Naveva. I was in Casanova
oh wow,
as an extra.
as an
And
ex.
I was in the orgy scene, but I was one of the people who was not naked because he said to me, Federico, I think you're better at eating than sex. And I said, I don't have an answer for you for that. But he said, I think you're a very lustful eater. Um, Mangi con gusto. So that I'm in the orgy scene eating chicken.
Yeah. Oh, I got
I mean,
again.
you really have to look. The camera moves back and forth. It's mostly on Donald Sutherland, but so I too got to work with Fellini, and I went to their apartment pretty often. And I knew Giulietta Messina, and in I don't know, 78, 1980, 81, something like that, I taught a course at the New School in New York called Fellini 23 and a half,
Oh,
because he had done 15 films plus the film Otto Mezzo 8.5. So that's 23 and a half. And this was before Zoom and before certain kinds of communications. And every week we would have a phone call from the class in New York on 12th Street to usually Rome. We did not have Fellini, but we had Giulietta Messina, we had Nino Rota, we had Marcello Mastroianni, we had Anuke May, each one talking about different films and aspects of Fellini. And when we're speaking in Italian, I would hold a telephone and a microphone, and we would hear them speak in Italian. I would translate, then I would ask the questions from the audience. And it was like a version of what you and I are doing now in a more technologically advanced way. But Fellini was just remarkable. He was one of my heroes. He's my favorite film director. My favorite film of all time, of all films, is La Dolce Vita, which I think is just a perfect film. And yeah, I mean, Italian cinema is something we could completely go down as the whole route. Luchino Visconti, film director and opera director. Franco Zeffirelli, film director and opera director. It's interesting how those two art forms connect. I think that cinema is the outgrowth of opera.
yeah.
What
It is
opera was in the 19th century, cinema became in the 20th century.
because there is everything. There's action, dialogues, there's set, and there's music.
Yeah.
We are. I am or helping a little bit. It's not me, but organizing a special screening for that will happen in Siena in July 21st, for Stealing Beauty. So Bernardo
Hmm.
Bertolucci's on Chianti,
Yeah.
uh, which is beautiful, really, really beautiful, a beautiful way. There's, he's another master in combining
Mhm.
images, great images, and spectacular music. He's always very much on
And
the.
Bertolucci was from Parma, and therefore the homeland of Verdi and Toscanini. And the people of Parma think that they're the greatest of all for opera, and they're among the greats, certainly. Recently there was an event, there was a performance of Andrea Chenier at the Teatro Regio in Parma. And I believe, I'm not certain, I believe that the baritone was Luca Salsi
Mhm.
playing Gerard. And at the curtain call, and it's Gregory Kundi and I think Anna Perozzi, great cast. Andrea Chenier is a wonderful opera. But the audiences of Parma express what they feel. I don't know if you heard this happen. And when Luca Salsi, the baritone, or whoever it was, came forward to take his bow, most of the audience applauded very happily. But a woman called out and said, Preferisco o è stato meglio Piero Cappuccilli. In other words, Piero Cappuccilli was much better than you are. And Luca Salsi stepped forward. He quieted the crowd because they started yelling. And he said, Sono d'accordo con lei, signora. I agree with you.
Yeah, it is a crowd that really, yes, as you say, they are. I mean, they have a knowledge and a passion which is
Yeah.
rare. And so I must say he gave the right answer. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, I worked with Piero Capuccilli. He was wonderful, but I don't do these comparative things with singers.
That's,
There's
that's,
only one Piero Capuccilli. There's only one Luca Salsi. There's only one Placido Domingo, one Luciano Pavarotti, one Jose Carreras. You can pick them all. Um, and they all have something wonderful and valid to offer. And in the composite, if I see, I love the opera Andrea Chenier. And if I've heard many baritones, it's Carlo Girard. Ultimately, that character is a composite of all these performances I've seen and heard. And one man brings one thing, one man brings another. That's why we keep going to opera through our whole lives. A film once made is a film, and it is what we see, and we get more from it each time, but it's a frozen object. And opera is liquid, it's fluid, it's different. Every time the curtain rises, it's a new event,
yeah.
and it adds to our memory bank and becomes part of our experience. Just like, and here's a transition, just like food and wine,
Yeah.
where you and I actually met and didn't know of each other's opera backgrounds. Um, you come from a family, and
Mhm.
you too, you're a cookbook author. You are an expert on wine, on olive oil, on food traditions. Um, where do we begin on that one? How did you start with that?
I really started as being the underwriter for my mother. That's when we met.
When you
This
say underwriter, I think you mean ghostwriter?
that when she started her very brilliant and important international career,
Yeah.
writing, like Italy, the Beautiful Cookbook and the Renaissance of Italian cooking, those,
Yeah.
she seeked for my help to write some recipes and articles that were published on a magazine, on a monthly magazine called Gardenia. It's a
Hmm.
plants and flowers. And so it was all mostly vegetarian cooking and so she sort of taught me how to do it, and I did it, and she would supervise. So that was the beginning,
Hmm.
that part. And then of course I fell into it, and I published a couple books, but
Yeah.
because I finally ended up working for the family business
Yeah.
in 1989 when I started. So that
Hmm.
became, my main occupation.
Um, you and I just before we began this conversation, we're drinking coffee. And when I talk to people about wine and coffee, and I try to explain the phenomenon of wine, the phenomenon of coffee, and I'm going to add the phenomenon of olive oil, they're all distinct in the Italian context. Let's start with that for a few reasons. One is, to me, coffee is a miracle because coffee is grown in many places, in Brazil, in Colombia, in India, in Vietnam, in Ethiopia, all across the equatorial band of the globe. And the beans are harvested. They're then transported to major ports like Genoa, like Napoli, like Trieste, Venice to some degree, just in Italy, and then other ports elsewhere. And different companies buy the beans. They roast the beans, they inspect the beans. Every bean has to be perfect. If there's a bad bean in the entire burlap bag, you have to throw out the whole bag. And ultimately, what winds up in your cup of espresso are 50 beans, not 49, not 51, 50 beans. And they are roasted torrefazione. They're roasted according to the taste and interest of the company that's roasting it, so that every blend is different. Because if you have Brazilian beans that are Arabica and you have beans, say, from Senegal that are Robusta and so on, the formula is different just of the beans, but then the roasting brings something else to it. and then the brewing, the temperature, the water that you use, the machine that you use, ultimately results in this little perfect cup of espresso. But that means that the coffee, the man or woman making the coffee in the bar in Milano, has little control on everything that comes before. In
Mhm.
winemaking, typically the grapes grow right outside your house or nearby. You monitor from when they first start to bud in the spring through the summer as they ripen. You decide when to harvest them in the fall. You check with the weather reports for rain. But this is all done near the house. So the person who makes her wine, and you're one of the Le Donne del Vino, the women of wine, um, has control from the beginning to the degree that she can control it because nature has its own ideas.
Yeah.
But within that, you have to respond to what you perceive as nature's ideas. But it all happens right there. And then you make your wine, and then you store your wine, and then you sell your wine. And I believe that in Italy, certainly Tuscany, they say that a wine, once it's born, begins to get older, but that's a good thing in a lot of cases. Whereas olive oil, once it's pressed, begins to die.
Mm.
In other words, that olive oil is
Yeah,
a,
it's, I mean, die, it's a big word. You
yeah.
could take yeah, it's just a mutation, an evolution. It's the oxidation. The olive oil is an extremely complex and delicate product. And
Hmm.
the oxidation there has a different action than the one.
Right. But how long can I love your oil? How long could a good oil last, or should it last?
I don't think, I mean, I can years. I'm talking, I mean, technically, legally, they say 2 years, after that. But honestly, if it is if you start with a really good olives and a lot of freshness and cleanness and everything is done really properly, it can last years. And then of course, when you say die, you mean that at the beginning there is a very powerful taste that then becomes more mellow, and then but when we put together a different blend of olives, we also think of the evolution in time so that you can keep on getting. So personally, I consider an olive oil life for 3-4 years. I would use, I mean, not that I have much that lasts so long, but I would use, as long as it is, very, very high quality. I would use, for cooking. Uh,
Hmm.
I'd use my nose to understand and
Yeah. And what does your nose look for?
my nose has to look for freshness. I don't know how I can explain, but when you smell the oil, really have to get a very fresh, there must be no sort of cloudy darkness, but really brilliant, clean, and that is and fruity. You have to
Hmm.
really fruit, and it can be, if it is a mild oil, it would be sweeter fruit like banana or apple. But then you go to greens and grass and asparagus. So those have to be there in the nose and in the.
And I want to make clear to listeners that what you're talking about is the olfactory, the smell, not
Yeah,
the taste.
yeah.
So it doesn't taste of bananas and asparagus, but it might have the fragrance.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Um, Now, you made a point in passing that is second nature to you and to me, but bears more emphasis. Namely, most olive oils and
Hmm.
many wines, but most olive oils are blends of different types of olives. In Liguria, they make a single mono olivo called Tajasca, and it's a beautiful fruity. I love Tajasca oil. It comes from Western Liguria, but most olive oils in the world tend to be combinations of different olives that have different characteristics of saltiness, sweetness, fattiness, and that's a good thing. Leanness,
Yeah.
dryness. These are all these elements. Similarly, many wines are blends. So Chianti, you're from Chianti district. Historically, I don't know about now, but historically it was a blend of at least five different grapes, of which one of them was Sangiovese. Am I correct that it was 1924 when they codified the formula for Chianti at that time? I think that was the year.
I think, yeah, maybe it was already codified before because it was with Bettino Ricasoli. So
Okay.
maybe the formula, yes, you're correct saying that, with the with the beginning of the consortium, then there was a real actual control.
Right.
So yeah, you can say,
So
but yeah, it's a blend. It is definitely a blend of different grapes. Also, because back in time there would be also white grapes because the
yes,
farm
Panayola.
needed sugar, they needed quantity. There was
Right.
a system was a sharecropping, and in sharecropping for them was crucial to have
Hmm.
quantity. So the grapes were the blend was including also white grapes that would
Yeah.
help sugar levels and less sophisticated in taste. But
But I remember the first time I tasted Chianti in Italy. I don't know if I ever told you this, but the first time I lived in Italy was the summer of 1973. I was a teenager and I lived in a little town. My mother took an apartment and the town became famous, but it was not famous yet. It was San Vincenzo in the province of Livorno. And at that time, there was no Gambero Rosso restaurant. It was just a little town where everything was completely local. There was just south of town a little sort of resort where Swiss people went to. It was called Ghirigoro. But the town itself was my first exposure to Italy in that we had le bombe di gas, these canisters of gas that we had to turn on and off, and we had to turn on
yeah,
the gas for the hot water, and everything was monitored just because resources were limited. At that time, fresh milk was hard to come by, and it came in it was boiled milk that was in triangles. You remember these triangles of milk?
yeah,
It was not a container, and
yeah,
you would
yeah.
punch a hole and pour it out. It didn't taste very good.
They look like,
Italian milk is now excellent, but this was a very different time. And I learned my first Italian there because no one spoke anything but Italian. And I remember it was July of 1973. I had never tasted tomatoes and I had never tasted peaches like that in my life. The peaches remain among the best ever. The tomatoes were wonderful. And there were very few things in the market. There was not a lot of food, but there were the essentials. There was dried pasta, there was delicious oil, there was Chianti wine, and probably some kind of Vernaccia di San Gimignano, and that was it. There was Rosso and Bianco. There were not a
yeah,
lot of choice. There was no shelf of wines. Um, and you only drank acqua minerale because you could not trust the tap water. And every Friday on the beach, they would set up a sheet and they would show a film, and the entire town would come down to the beach and watch the film for free. And among the first films I saw was one called Prendi I soldi e scappa
yeah,
by Woody Allen, Take the Money and Run. And I had seen these movies in America. And then after about 4 weeks, they said, this will be a long night. We have Via col Vento. And
yeah.
I didn't know what Via col Vento was. It was Gone with the Wind. And I watched 4 hours of Mammy speaking Sicilian and Rosella Oada, Scarlett O'Hara speaking Milanese, and Rhett Butler, I think, was from Tuscany. And I learned my Italian accents watching Gone with the Wind on the beach in San Vincenzo. But these become foundational experiences of taste. And, when people ask me to explain my affinity for Italy, part of it is, only part of it, that I had many of my first experiences that a young man or young woman would have in Italy rather than in New York or the United States. And therefore, my perspective on the world was an
Yeah.
Italian perspective.
And that's,
And
yeah,
yeah,
quite unique, I must say, because
I think so because now I have a memory that many Italians don't remember because they weren't paying attention. To them, it was normal. To me, it was unusual.
yes,
And
we
so,
gave
for
things,
example,
and instead you had to you were also, it's also a peculiar. I mean, you really are very very good at pointing out and and yeah, extracting. But for us, things were, yeah, granted, not even worse. I don't know what we paid attention to.
well, for example, 3 years later, 2 years later, 75, when I lived in Bologna, I told you I had this friend, Vittoria. She would take me shopping for the things that I needed for where I lived as a student.
Mhm.
So I remember that she took me to a store on Via dell'Indipendenza. She said, "We have to buy you a blanket because in the winter it gets cold here and it's very umido, it's very humid, moist." And she selected a blanket that was high quality, lightweight, a good price. Then it was like 30,000 lira, which was money.
Yeah.
But at the same time, she said this will last you. The blanket is right there. I still use it because she said the important thing is you have to buy things that will last. And that was a value that was completely opposite my American experience. So that everything that I acquired in that era in Bologna, unless I changed my shirt size, I still have because these things were made to last because they came from a tradition in Italy that you don't non si spreca niente. You take care of your clothing, you take care of your kitchen equipment, you take care of everything, and it's made to last. So
Yeah,
um,
it was
it leads me to
more
be
sustain.
also what
Sorry, it was a more sustainable concept, I
it
must
was.
say.
Once you're right, I never thought of it that way, but absolutely. And I let's see if I can summon my hero, one of my heroes, Vitruvius, who
Mm,
said that every building he built and everything he made had to have um, utilitas, and then whatever the Latin word is for durability,
mhm,
and venusta, beauty.
uh,
Uh, so let's say utility, it has to be practically useful, it has to be durable, and it has to be beautiful. And that concept that my blanket has to last long, it has to be useful, and it's also beautiful
yeah, yeah.
because
Well,
you want beautiful things. And that so when you walk around Italy, even today, and you look in shop windows, they're designed to attract the eye, to please. When I was talking about Pierluigi Pizzi before, this idea that he put beauty in everything he did because he believed in it.
yeah,
Um, it was not something excessive. It was not something extravagant. It was fundamental to every production he created. Every hand gesture that he would give to a singer had to
yeah.
be beautiful.
I
And
guess empires come up, rise, and then go down. So you, at the end, you sort of take out a lesson of, what are the things that essential. It's like, I think it's a distillation of a very very long history. That.
so you and I are of a certain age. We're not of an ancient age, but we have life experience. You have children. You
Hmm.
also have seen many young people. You've worked with many young people. You are a very contemporary, aggiornata, as the Italian would say. You're up to date on things. Do you think that these values that we're talking about in Italians exists in the young generation of Italians today, or have they been digitized and internationalized too much?
Well, looking my family, my children, I think they still have it pretty much. I guess. Looking around, I think yes. I think the kids still have. I mean, not the majority, maybe a lot of them. They're a little lost with this, and we all have a lot of preoccupation for what goes on in this generation. How they've been, but. there can still be. I mean, it's so much there, so much in the culture still not gone. So it's
By the way, I
probably the one.
remember it's firmitas is the
Firmitas, che bravo, bravissimo.
utilitas firmitas venustas. There we go. So I still have it. um, no, but
Well,
one thing I'm noticing, I'm speaking to you from New York, is, and I don't want to get into long politics, but many Americans, for different reasons, are looking at leaving the country now. And one of the countries that they most want to go to is Italy because
no,
they're very attracted by everything they perceive. Italians often say to me, why do they want to come here? Everything is so chaotic. Nothing works. Nothing is good. And it strikes me that there's such a different opinion because, yes, people from parts of Northern Europe may criticize Italy, but they all want to go there. And the food is wonderful. And there's so much that's wonderful in Italy. And right now, the healthcare system is ranked second in the world after France. So the healthcare system is quite something. Whether we believe that, I can tell you that access to healthcare in Italy is much quicker than America. Um,
yeah, I
and
know. World from America. Maybe it's not everywhere in every part of Italy the same.
yeah,
Some more favorite than others, but
right.
still can find very good help. Yeah.
But how do Italians feel, if you could speak to this, about all these Americans, but these people in general who want to come and live in Italy? And I don't mean migrants, and migrants is a very important issue. The former Pope and the new Pope are addressing that. And that's a separate but very important issue that we take seriously. But I'm talking about people right now with money who can
Yeah.
live in different places, but
Very
choose
happy,
Italy. Yeah.
very charming because I mean it is of a great value for us to get all these people from America. So we really are happy, and I think people still come because they do find what they're looking for. I mean, they do find kindness, they do find support, they do find in most cases. Well, there is a lot of you have to know how to move a little bit because maybe there are some parts of the year where there could be big crowds, but with some right indications there's so much that you can do in Italy without going to the usual Firenze, Venezia, and Roma. You add a little bit of that and then just go out and visit the countryside, visit villages, tiny places. You can still find treasures.
So you are a Donna del Vino. This is an important organization. And one of the mottos, if I get it correctly, is poco ma buono. In other words, drink less, but drink really good stuff.
Yes.
And my philosophy when I talk to people about visiting Italy is poco ma buono. In other words, do not unpack your bags 5 times in 12 days and
No.
not check into and out of hotels in Rome, Florence, Venice, and so on. But find a base,
Yeah.
one town or maybe two, and explore the town and the surrounding areas. So
I
that, for
one of the,
example, yeah,
sorry, I keep on through that. One of them, there's so much beautiful major art also in the small villages. All these painters that they're in big museums. Then at the end, they were born in the village outside in the countryside. So you can go to the village and you can still find paintings there. So you don't really need to go to. You can sort of skip. And also we were the founders of that magnificent history that's called the slow food, which
yes.
inspired English definition. It's an Italian, very Italian way of thinking, and very important. Slow down, take your
Yeah.
time, enjoy. Poco, but buono, good.
In fact, I was at the beginning of that movement as well. It happened in the Piazza di Spagna in Rome. And I'm suddenly forgetting the name of this wonderful man from Bra, Carlo, the man who found really the
Ah,
founder of, huh?
Petrini,
Carlo
Carlo Petrini.
Petrini, of course. Carlo Petrini has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He's a wonderful, incredibly inspiring man. I love him very much. And I was one of the people who happened to be there when they wanted to build a McDonald's at the site of a lovely cafe that used to be one of the bars that I would go to when I lived in Rome, not far from where Fellini lived. It was about a 10-minute walk from there. And I would always go to that bar because they knew me and they made a very good coffee and they made a very good cornetto, which is like the Roman croissant with apricot jam. And it was just lovely. And it was local, even though it was right next to the Spanish Steps in the tourist area. It maintained its local character. And then suddenly they were closed and they wanted to build a McDonald's there, and there were demonstrations, and Carlo Petrini was leading the demonstration. I was there too. And they said to him, Va bene, Carlo, non vuoi fast food. What do you want? And you don't want fast food. What do you want? And he paused and he said, slow food. And the journalist said, well, what is that? He said, I'll get back to you. And he
Yeah.
did. And he wrote a manifesto for what is slow food, that it be clean, safe, tasty, affordable, seasonal, part of
Affordable.
the tradition, and not haute cuisine, alta cucina, not something gimmicky, but relating to the territory from where it came. So that, for example, where you live in Tuscany, beautiful olive oils, beautiful wines, also a lot of beans. And so beans
Yeah.
are part of the tradition of where you live. They might not be the part of the tradition in Trentino, let's say, or Sicily.
I really like to say, instead of, don't take me wrong, because it's just two example, but instead of a chef, a good cuoca, a good
A
woman,
woman. Yeah. Yeah.
because
So,
there has been, such a push for this, which is a very important figure, the chef, important and leading maybe, but at the end of the day, what comes out of a nice, good woman cuoca, that she can work on her local ingredients and she knows them, and convey the differences between all this, as you were saying, Sicily or Tuscany or Puglia. It's very
so
important.
another one of the films they showed in San Vincenzo in 1973 was called in Italian Non toccare le vecchiette, which means don't touch the old ladies. But
Yeah.
it was actually Mel Brooks's film, The Producers, in which an American theater producer seduces old women to get money from them so he can produce his shows. And I always laugh at that title because one lady, she was in Anzio in Lazio, south of Rome.
Mhm.
Um, I was walking by her home one day and there was this beautiful smell of garlic coming out. And this was 1979, 78. And I called from below and I said in Italian, Signora, quell'odore, quel profumo, signora, that beautiful perfume of garlic. What is it? And she said, sto preparando qualcosa, niente. I'm doing nothing. It's just a normal thing. I said, I would love to learn what you're doing. And she said, Salga, come on upstairs. And I went in and she was in her kitchen wearing a beautiful white apron and preparing garlic. And she showed me how she cuts her garlic to take out the green stem and then how she cuts it on the bias. I learned to cut garlic from that woman in a way that there's never the smell. You get the fragrant part of the garlic, but not the bitter part of the garlic. And I promised her that whenever I would cut garlic and teach it, I would mention her and how garlic. And I said, do you have, I said in Italian, do you have any other advice for me? And she had just seen a film on television. She said, "Si, non toccare le vecchiette. Don't touch the old lady." But wherever I've gone in Italy, for decades, I've been known to follow older women and ask them, what are you doing in the kitchen? Because invariably they'll say, it's nothing. I've just done this forever. But so much of what I've learned from the Alps all the way down to Sicily, to Agrigento, is from older women doing what they do at home. So I describe my cooking. I'm a home cook. I'm
Yeah.
not a restaurant chef. And I love documenting what people do. You and I had a beloved friend named Carol Field.
Yeah.
And Carol Field was one of the great food writers. She had a home not far from you in Tuscany. And she was the first person, we have to give her credit for this, who wrote about La Nonna, the grandmother. Now everybody talks about Le Nonne like they're inventing it. Carol did a book of grandmothers 40 years ago and understood their wisdom and how important it was to document what they were doing. And I commend people to her works. Her book, The Italian Baker, is the best book on Italian bread and baking. And she did several celebrating Italy. And Carol Field, because she was a woman, because she spoke great Italian, was able to gain the confidence of these people in a way that I, as a younger male from America, nice boy that I was, but the women interacted with me differently than they did with Carol Field, who was slightly older and very genteel. With me, it was just being a student.
Yeah.
And, you know, and your mother and I wrote a cookbook together. And, she was a grandmother by then. And she was a very practical, matter of fact person, but of a very different style than I am. And we're very fond of each other, but she was very resolute about the way things are done. And I would say to her, well, a lady in Brescia told me this, or a lady in Bari told me that. She said, well, that's all right for Brescia or Bari, but not for here. Okay.
Determined, very determined,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. Um, so did I leave anything out? I mean, there's so much that you and I can talk about.
Yeah, we got it on.
Would you like to talk about something that I didn't mention? You can ask me questions.
No, you've been really touching a lot. I know. What I like is what you were, how you convey the complexity of things you were saying before about, winemaking, you were asking me and all the olive oil making. And so all these activities that we do, I think you are one of the persons that I know that knows better how to convey the multiple tasks that it takes to deal with all these things. Yeah.
Well, I think what I was getting at, but didn't quite complete because I went in a different direction. I'm very concerned about the commodification of Italy. Italy cannot, any country, but certainly not Italy, cannot be easily categorized. And
Mm.
if we commodify it so that it's just, the standard experience, if you go to this boutique, it's like a checklist. You see the David in Florence and you see the Pietà in Rome, and you go to Positano and you do these things, that then Italy. And to me, Italy is about allowing the Italians to be themselves.
Yeah.
Because,
It's about, celebrating the biodiversity. Like
yeah.
for us, like a big fight that I had been going through as a winemaker, for instance, is the fact that you started earlier. You were talking how, Chianti Classico wine is made with several grapes, which is so much more complicated to communicate because, you're saying, my wine is made with Merlot, bam, the whole world knows. But when you start saying, my wine is made with Sangiovese, Canaiolo, Colorino, they go, what?
Ciliegino, my favorite. Don't forget Ciliegino. It's my favorite Italian grape.
We have a new wine that is made only from pure Ciliegolo. So
Really? Ciliegolo. Is there Ciliegolo and Ciliegino? I think there's both.
there's
Ciliegolo.
same. It's there's always like even Sangiovese can be called Sangiovese, Sangioveto, Sanforte. I mean, so
Right.
and also the grape is different because of course each of this grape is going to adapt to the soil. So you say yes, it's the same, but the best part and the most interesting quality is that in fact they are different from if
Yeah.
it is they are there. But that, when what you're just saying about commodification, that's something that if it will happen, it will be a very sad day because Italy is all about diversity, tons of different types of tomatoes and zucchinis and
Yeah.
being and sort of cultivating all this and be very regional. Like some,
And dialects and languages. And for
yeah,
example, this is not a test, but if I say the word agretti, Agretti, what are they to you?
the agretti. Well, I know exactly. Agretti is a little type of. It's like sort of looks like an herb, and it grows
Yes.
near the water. It's in the water, so it's something that is extremely seasonal. It's really right now the moment.
Yeah.
You only over a couple of weeks, maybe a month, and that's it. Very delicate.
But that's agretti in southern Tuscany, in Umbria, in northern Lazio.
Then,
Agretti in the northeast is a leafy vegetable. It has
uh,
nothing to do with, so that a lot of times the challenge is even people who are very proficient see the word agretti, they look in the Tuscan dictionary or Veneto dictionary, and based on that, that's what they say the food is. And so that it's so complicated, it requires many lifetimes. That's why my favorite line in all of Verdi is from his opera Attila, where the Roman baritone says, Avrai tu l'universo, resti l'Italia a me. In other words, you can have the universe, let Italy be mine, because Italy
yeah,
has so much complex diversity that I get worried when I see Italians feel that they have to accommodate the foreigner by presenting the beauty myth of Tuscany or the romantic myth of Rome or whatever. Be yourself. You're yourself. That's why I love you. But be yourselves as you are, because already that's something so precious that if you meet, if I go to Bari, I don't know how often you go to Bari, but Bari is a large city by the port. It is a port city. The language is a bit salty and rustic, and you still have these very large women who Italian women tend to be very, elegant, and they're not large, but the stereotype of the large Italian grandmother is often embodied. And they sit in front of this spianatoia, this sort of wooden board on a street, making orecchiette, making pasta by hand, and talking and singing and gossiping across the way. They're not doing that for the tourists, but now the tourists go there and they photograph these women, and it's beginning to change how they interact with one another.
yeah,
I speak Italian, so I like to go there and ask them. My question always is, Signora, cosa sta facendo? Cosa fa? What are you doing? Because that's always a
yeah,
good question for an Italian woman who's preparing or making something with her hands. And that's how I learn, because they're so generous and willing to teach. But I don't want that tourist buses go around Italy and stop to photograph the fat ladies making orecchiette and these things that we tend, the Godfather in Sicily, that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Because then Italy will lose what's so unique about it.
Yeah, well, we try very hard, especially us that we are involved in agriculture, in winemaking, forest keeping, and olive trees and all that. We really try very hard to convey this idea and keep, stable and protect the products and protect their authenticity of those products. So it's very important.
So I'm going to conclude with a very personal question. What's your favorite pasta? If you could only have one pasta on the desert island, what would it be?
Spaghetti al pomodoro.
Spaghetti al pomodoro. In other words, the most classic, the most essential.
Yes.
Um, you
That's
know that I find it very hard in Italy to find in restaurants excellent spaghetti al pomodoro. I find it in homes all the time, and yours, I make a good one in many places, but somehow it's too simple for restaurants. And even in Naples, where they should make it very well, they always say, have something else, have the gnocchi, have the ravioli, have something else. Spaghetti with tomato sauce, with or without basilico. Do you add basil or no?
A little basil I like. I like it.
Okay.
I
So
prefer
what's the
certainly,
secret of your tomato sauce? How do you make it?
and I don't care so much for cheese on top. I mean, I
Okay.
can have so proper pomodoro and a little type of I think that's
So how do you make your sauce? Marcella Hazan famously put an onion in hers. That's very Romagnolo. But how do you make your sauce?
I make the sauce, well, a little bit of garlic. I don't use the onion. I use extra virgin olive oil, a very, very large pan, wide, and I cook very high flame, a lot of heat. So I really cook it very, very quickly and not very much. So I try not to boil it, but really to.
So these so-called pelati or cherry tomatoes, what kind of tomatoes?
I am not a great um, friend of cherry tomatoes because I think they have too much skin. I
I
like
agree. I
pelati.
agree.
I might use a few, of what, not really the small ones, but sort of medium that I cut in little pieces also to put in, especially in season, to have also some fresh ones.
So you don't crush the garlic, you slice the garlic very thin. By the
Yeah.
way, listeners, don't crush garlic. Throw away your garlic crusher. That you don't need that.
I
it
just
extracts the juice. It's terrible.
as soon as it starts singing in the oil, as soon as I just already go. I don't let it overcook or nothing. Just quickly and go with the tomato.
Now, very important question. Do you boil your spaghetti, drain it, and add it to the pan with the tomatoes? Or
Yeah.
do you drain it, put it in a bowl, and add the sauce on top?
Allora, for the spaghetti al pomodoro, it can be also added on top
Okay.
because you really like the tomato also to be in big. For pasta where you want the mantecato, I would do the other. Pull them out of the pan and put them in the boiling pan and put them in. But if I need something to mantecare a bit, like
Mantecare means adding a bit of fat, so it might be butter, it might be a little oil, a little something that gives it
another, the second favorite dish after the spaghetti al pomodoro is spaghetti con le arselle or with the small
razor
shells.
clams, razor clams.
Yeah, razor clams, right? So those are my
Um,
second. In that
but
case, I pass and put it in the pan with the razor clams.
and how do you prepare those? And then I'll tell you my preparation. It's a bit different. Go ahead.
I just put them in I put the razor clams in my pan. I put a little bit of garlic, put the razor clams in the pan, cook them until they open, and then I start pulling out I should just pull them up, put them there. I could sometimes in fact I add also a little bit of wine at the
White
beginning.
wine.
Wine a little bit, but I don't suffer too much if it's not there. And
No.
then I bought my pasta, put it there, and then it covered with parsley, prezzemolo. Yes.
So
And I'm
that's the classic way.
very, very picky about my parsley. Parsley is very
Go
difficult.
ahead. Talk about parsley.
Parsley, if it's a big, those big, with
Bunches.
very small and very tasty.
Okay. Here's what I do just for my razor clam pasta. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I made this once in Treviso because I used the ingredients I had nearby. I didn't plan this dish, but it's what I had at hand. Um, I had spaghetti. I had arcella, the razor clams. I did not have garlic, but I had a little bit of fresh ginger root that I peeled.
Yes.
And I did not have white wine, but I had prosecco, sparkling, lower
Yeah.
alcohol. wine. And what I did was I cooked it as you did, but instead of garlic, I used ginger, and instead of white
Mhm.
wine, I used prosecco, and I did not add parsley.
Yeah,
It was very
yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, I
It was
must
a
say.
lovely, lovely sauce because the sweetness of sweet dryness of the prosecco and the ginger was real. It was not much ginger, just a little. Was
I'm gonna.
really something with the chewy. I had spaghettoni, the thick spaghetti. It was really something. So, ladies and gentlemen, when Italian friends and friends of Italy get together, this is what we talk about. And one of my favorite people in the whole world, and I mean this, is Emanuela Stucchi-Prinetti, who I've been thrilled to count as a friend for more than 40 years. And even if we don't see each other as often as I would like, Italians have, in my experience, a unique capacity for friendship. And one of my favorite things about Italy, beyond the food and the art and the everything that we love about Italy, is that my Italian friendships are different from friendships anywhere else in the world. And they're always there for me. And even if I don't see them as often as I'd like, um, if you move to Italy, make friends with Italians. Don't just treat them as commodities and, fascinating cultural artifacts. But that to me is the strength of this country. Beyond everything else, is that the nature, the quality of friendship is unique. And that's why, my dear, you are one of Fred's favorites. And you got into the month of May of 2025. And I thank you very much.
Well, thank you very, very much. And you are one of my great friends, and I'm very, very proud and happy that it's been going on for so long. And it's really thank you for all the beautiful things that you say about us Italians and about me. And thank you for this lovely time together.
I'm glad we did it.